Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Coffee and Culture and Other Things That Matter in Today's Workplace, presented by Alana Dunoff and brought to you by IFMA's Corporate Facilities Council. Please be aware that this webinar is being recorded and you are muted to prevent background noise during the presentation. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them in the questions box, and if time permits, Alana will answer questions at the end of the presentation. I now turn you over to Dexter Barrow, the Programs Committee Chair for the Corporate Facilities Council.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our CFC Monthly Wednesday webinar series. What a way to get the month started every month. We'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, SenseFix, eStructurer, and Tersana, who help us every month to bring this amazing content to you. We'd also like to give a big shout out to Wayne Whitesell for being such a champion for the CFC. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Alana Dunoff, who has over 30 years in strategic facility planning and project management work in commercial, healthcare, and retail facilities. In 2002, she embarked on her own consulting and instructional training practice. Alana is also passionate about FM education. With over 20 years experience as an adjunct professor, she currently teaches in the facility management program at Temple University, and she's also a qualified instructor for IFMA's FMP credential. Alana has been a keynote speaker and has presented at dozens of facility management industry conferences and corporations. She is a subject matter expert for the IFMA FMP body of knowledge, has been published in FM trade journals, featured in numerous FM publications and podcasts. She's also served on the local and international IFMA board and is on the board of Women in Facility Management. She has become an IFMA Fellow in 2014. Alana earned her BS in psychology from Boston University and an MS in facility planning and management from Cornell University. So without further ado, Alana, take it away.
Oh my goodness, I got exhausted just listening to all the things that I have done. Hi, everybody, and welcome to Coffee and Culture. Hopefully you've got your coffee with you. As we get started here, we thought we'd do a quick pulse question, just because I'd like to kind of get to know kind of everyone who's joining us today. So here's your first question. Your first activity of the day is to just let us know. I want to know how your organization is working today. So if you are mandated to be in the office 2 to 3 days a week, or if you're mandated to be in the office every day. I'm curious if you have no mandates. Like, are you an organization where people are kind of, the horses are running wild and people kind of come and go as they please? If you have no mandate for staff, but maybe FM or other support services are mandated, then hit D. And finally, if you have no mandate, but you know it's coming, hit that one. So we'll give the poll just a moment to happen, and then we'll get the results. Kylie, I'm not seeing them, so hopefully you'll let me know when they kind of pull up. But as those results are pulling up, I am going to add one thing to what Dexter was saying in his lovely introduction of me. First off, I also want to thank Corporate Facilities Council for inviting me here. So as he said, and as you can sort of see, I have a lot of different hats that I wear in my career. And so I like to sort of tell people when I begin that I wear those different hats, and I try to bring those hats together when I present. So that I try to bring my academic sort of research theory side in with my practical side, looking at with my consulting work and what's sort of happening in the industry. Kylie, do we have the results of the poll yet?
We sure do. And so our top answer was that there's no mandate. Staff comes and goes as they please. And our second top answer close behind was mandated to be in the office 2 to 3 days a week. And then equal for third place is no mandate, but FM and support services are mandated, and no mandate yet, but it's coming. And none of us here today are mandated to be in the office every day.
Okay. So what's super interesting about that, and the point that I was sort of hoping, and I've seen this as I've given this presentation, is that a whole lot of years ago, that's not how it used to look. Everybody was in the office. And we're in this place and moment where there's a lot of evolution and a lot of change, and every organization doesn't look like every other organization anymore. We are coming in and out of the office in very different ways, which means the dynamicness and the evolution of the workplace really is something we need to be paying attention to and talking about. Which leads me to one other piece and sort of the lens of which I'm talking to you today. And that is, as Dexter said, my 30 plus odd years now of being a strategic facilities planner. And I think after the 3 decade plus years of experience, I can finally safely say with some level of confidence that the workplace will forever be evolving. And hopefully you're all shaking your head saying, yes, that is true, right? The pendulum is constantly swinging. It will continue. It looked different last year. It'll look different next year. It'll look different in 5 years and 10 years. And our job in facilities is to continue to figure out how to be nimble and flexible and understand the dynamic changes and natures of organizations, because it will always change and evolve. Maybe it's a little job security for all of us as well. Okay, so here's what I want to do today. I want to give you a case study, really a story about one evolving workplace, a client that I've been working with for many, many years, and I want to tell their story. And as I did the work for them, I started to realize that there were a lot of things that I was hearing differently about what matters in the workplace today based on the conversations I was having. And I was calling them workplace requirements, and I realized what they really are is occupant services. Because occupant services are things that facilities managers and professionals provide into the building. And then we'll wrap up with a little bit of trying to get maybe your perspective. If you have your stories or experiences, I'd love to hear them, and others probably would as well, or any questions that you might have. So let me start off with just a little bit of the client profile and kind of let you know sort of the client that I've been working with. They are essentially a utility energy company. They have, and I'm in the Philadelphia area, so they're just outside of Philadelphia. They have 4 buildings on their campus, about 250,000 square feet, and about 1,000 employees. When the pandemic happened, a small group of employees went fully remote, and some of them left the state. They went to California and Florida and New Hampshire, and really kind of moved out and around. And the company decided to adopt what they called their Flex First attendance policy, basically saying that anybody can come into the office and work anywhere they want at any point, except for some mandated employees, including the facilities and support staff organization, and some folks who supported the critical infrastructure. Most of those buildings are pretty typical vanilla office layout, except they have a really super cool control center, and that's where those critical infrastructure people have to be. So as we were making our way through the pandemic and sort of at the end of the pandemic, with it kind of in the rearview mirror, we started to talk about what happens with this campus. Because people are working so differently than they were today, what does this next generation, the campus, really need to do, have, feel like, be like, in order to support this evolving workforce where people are coming in? And it's not just that fact that some people are coming in and not coming in anymore, but also a new generation, literally a new generation of young people who have different needs and wants in the workplace as well. So this was the problem that I was charged with. And so back in the fall of 23, we initiated a strategic campus planning effort. I interviewed almost the entire senior leadership and line managers, so 94 interviews. That was a lot, a lot of people. And the genesis of those interviews and those kinds of conversations I was having was really trying to understand those who were coming in to the office, why they were coming in, why their teams were coming in, why they weren't coming in. And if they were coming in, what were they doing in the office? How did it look differently than it was before? What do they need different than what the traditional office space was providing them? We also were exploring this idea of, do we need to be and should we be looking at giving up some real estate? And I'm sure many of you have had those conversations as well. Is it time to shed? The short answer is no, we decided not to, although we did do a really deep dive on it. That's for another presentation. The other thing that we had, in addition to the self-reporting of all the interviews that I did, we also were able to have and use badging data. So when people were swiping in, which this real world data, this real actual data was also really helpful in kind of balancing between what people were saying they were doing and what they were actually doing. So I want to give you just a quick little snippet of what we learned in the data collection process, and then we'll jump into the things that really matter. So in the big picture, there were a couple of trends that really came sort of up to the surface with this client. First off, this flex first is working. The people really like the ability to work wherever they want to work. Is very highly valued, and for the most part, managers felt that it was a pretty productive environment. Maybe not perfect, maybe not quite the same as being in the office, but still very strong. They also said, I heard very clearly that taking away Flex First could be really detrimental. But I also heard from the leadership that the office truly has value, that they understood the value of a place where people can be together to innovate and collaborate and communicate, and that it strengthened relationships and really supported a productive environment. So nobody wanted the office to go away, but they just want flexibility. The other thing that the data really suggested was that management was in. Looking at the badging data, we could really see that management was in more frequently than their staff, and they were reporting that as well. But the management was also very clearly saying that we're looking for intentional opportunities to encourage their staff to come back in. That even though they could say, hey, I want you in, they felt it was a sort of a hard thing to do sometimes. And so they were looking for new ways and creative ways for the why people should come into the office. There was also an issue around striving for balance. I mentioned to you before that there are some people who are mandated to be in, like facilities and support services and some critical infrastructure, and then everyone else could do whatever they wanted. Well, this has caused quite a bit of inequity and even a little bit of a morale issue when it comes to some of the managers who are dealing with people who kind of fall under those different categories. As a matter of fact, things like, and I'll talk about it in a little bit, but like food services, when the cafeteria started to shrink and provide less food options, the people who were mandated to work on campus almost felt like they got punished. Like, I have to be in every day, and now I can't even get a salad bar. I have to only get a cold sandwich. So this inequity in balance is something we need to strive for and figure out. And then the last big trend that we saw was around a culture shift. That the culture was changing, and it's not good or it's bad, and culture often changes. Just acknowledging that culture is different. And the question we started asking ourselves is, what is the role of the workplace in supporting culture and helping people really feel engaged and a part of the organization? So I'm just going to share with you just a couple pieces of data, just again to give you kind of a big sense of the big picture. So this data is a little bit old, but I think it shows the trend that we expected to see. So this graph that you're seeing just shows the difference of the months of June to January between 23 and 24. And you can see in the 6-month period that we were seeing in 2024 that attendance was increasing. And this increase was a little bit organic, or perhaps it was the intention of the managers who had said they wanted more people to come in, that this may be the actual byproduct where people were starting to come in a little bit more. And the badging data showed us this as well. Our average peak campus attendance was about 39%. And I share that with you because you're like, 39%, it's still not a lot, right? And that's a really important part of this process, that even though that peak attendance was up about 7% from the previous year, it's still not super high. And that overall attendance for the entire campus had only increased in the last year, increased about 5%. It's increased another couple percentage in 2025. So we're seeing the trend continue to tick up, just in an organic manner. Perhaps people are coming in for more reasons, or they like being in more, and we're seeing that starting to happen. It also dovetails with a great research study that was published last year by CBRE, Math Behind Hybrid Work. And if this is interesting stuff to you, or you're in this, you might want to read it because it was very interesting. But I pulled out one piece of data that is sort of goes with what I'm talking about, and that was showing that in 2022, about 37% of the people they polled felt that the office culture and being in the office was important. And now in 2023, a year later, that had jumped to 45%. So we're seeing the evolution, the constant swinging of people coming in and the dynamicness of the workforce. Okay. So hopefully that gives you kind of the big picture of who the organization is. And I'm going to dive into these ideas of these sort of workplace requirements or occupant services that I think really matter. And these are based on this particular organization, but I think that these are all pretty universal. And you'll tell me as we get to the end which ones resonate with you and other ones that you might add. And there were more on this list, but I wanted to pick the ones that I thought were really at the top. So the first type of space that really matters are individual workspaces. We're accustomed to having individual workspaces, right? A place that we come into the office, it's our desk, our workstation, our office, where we have pictures of the kids or the dogs and our stuff from work that we have and that we use on a regular basis. But in this sort of new world order of the workspace, the individual workspaces right now need to be thought of perhaps a little bit differently. Right now, we've had a dedicated workspace, or in this organization, they've had a dedicated workspaces for everybody. Everybody has a place with their name on it. We started thinking about, but maybe not everybody needs to have that anymore, and maybe not everybody is in the office on a regular basis. So we started then thinking about what are the individual tasks that people do. When I come into my individual space, I need a space to do emails. I need a space for phone calls. I need a space to talk maybe one-on-one with someone. I need an individual space to have a reflective moment or to dig really deep into something and to really concentrate. So maybe we need to start thinking about the importance of individual workspaces in a very different way. So we said, okay, we have dedicated workspaces, and these are for the people who are going to be in on some regular basis. And I'll share with you what we decided to do around that. But dedicated workspaces, right? A space with my name on it, and we might have those. But we also thought that maybe we need to start thinking about how do we support those people who don't have dedicated spaces, who aren't coming into the office regularly. And we've been calling those spaces like work anywhere spaces, or maybe you call them touchdown spaces, but they're multi-purpose spaces that allow for someone to sort of come in, sit down, pop up their laptop, and they use these spaces in between meetings. So they're in very public areas, near the conference rooms and those kinds of spaces. We also thought that we needed to do a better job with quiet spaces. Even before the pandemic, when open office became really a thing, most organizations did quiet spaces really poorly, which is why people didn't like open offices, because it was too noisy and there was too much distraction. So we've been thinking about how do we create individual spaces that for people can work that allow for concentrated, distraction-free work. And furniture does that with acoustic panels, or there are those phone booths now that you can use. So we're starting to think about how do we incorporate those kinds of spaces. And then the last kind of individual spaces we've been thinking about are hoteling spaces. And I'm sure many of you have these as well. But these are spaces that have a little bit more amenity, more than like the work anywhere spaces or the quiet spaces. These spaces will have docking stations and monitors and even a desk phone if that's necessary. They are places that are, you get through a reservation system. And so all of a sudden, as we think about the individual workspaces, we have several different kinds of spaces that an individual can come to and work on depending on whatever they need, depending on the task they're doing or how frequently they come into the office. The one other thing I want to share around the dedicated workspaces is that this is an interesting issue has crept up in the past year or two with the dedicated spaces. So it turns out that most people still have their dedicated workspace, a place with their name on it, even if they're only coming in like once a month or even less than that. If they went remote, they lost their workspace a while ago. But everybody else, if as long as you've shown up on campus, you still have a dedicated space. But what is happening is that's impacting available capacity, because it looks like on paper we are out of space, even though we're only at about 39 to 40% occupancy. So we have some new strategies we're going to implement to recapture some of the individual spaces that right now are kind of holed up by someone who may only be in the office 1 day a week. I know it's kind of silly. This organization's moving a little slowly. Okay, so if individual spaces matter, so do together spaces. So with together spaces, we're talking about the traditional types of together spaces like conference rooms, right? Everyone has a conference room, a room with a door with technology where we go and we meet for 12 people and 8 people and 10 people. And those are valuable, but in this new dynamic environment, they're not getting used in the same way, and they often go pretty empty. So we started thinking about unscheduled spaces to allow for more impromptu collaboration. Things like soft furniture with a whiteboard and a couple surfaces, and all of a sudden you've got a space where people didn't even know who was going. I didn't know you were going to be in the office today. Hey, let's sit down and talk for a moment, and let's write on the whiteboard and sort of engage in these impromptu spaces. We also want to supplement or change out some of the formal conference rooms to something that's a little bit more informal, that allows for more team or virtual meetings. Because I don't know if you've ever been in a big conference room on a virtual meeting when there's like 2 of you in the conference room built for 12 people and there's 2 people on the screen. It is not a very intimate environment. So we want to recapture and rethink about how we're using some of the spaces today that aren't being used and change them into smaller meeting spaces and smaller team spaces so that you have a more intimate conversation. This way, when you're talking to people on screen, those who are virtual, and there's a couple of you in the office, it feels like you're more together. It's a more engaging, more collaborative way of working. And then the other kind of together space we've been really thinking about is what happens for the teams that really aren't coming into the office at all. And there's whole departments like finance, like they're barely coming in at all, maybe once a month. So how do we help them feel the value of being in the office? And so what we've been looking at is creating what we're calling sort of hoteling neighborhoods, where a manager can reserve a whole suite or a whole space that has a variety of different kinds of spaces in it, so that the individuals don't have to say, oh, where are you sitting and where are you sitting? But instead, we can create a space for the team to be together. Because if they're only coming in once a month, the reason they're coming in is to be together. So let's ensure that there's a places and spaces with different kinds of furniture and offerings that they can all be together and work together in the way that they really want to, rather than individual spaces and then reserving a conference room and not really having opportunity to really engage. So those are some of the together spaces, why together spaces really matter. And we can go further with those together spaces. And one of the things that I'm really excited about, and we've been talking a lot about, is this idea of engaging spaces, that engaging spaces really matter. And when we think about engaging spaces, you probably have a lot of these too, right? The cafeteria, if you have one, is an engaging space. The coffee pantry or kitchenette, which I'll talk about shortly, is an opportunity for engagement. If you have a fitness center, these are all places where people engage and have been engaging in the workplace. But engaging spaces go a little bit deeper now too. They start to really talk about and think about wellness and mental health spaces as well. And if we dive a little bit deeper into what that means, that starts getting to think about what does it mean to have wellness spaces in our office that go beyond just a fitness center, which is a wellness space, but can we do more? What's really out there to really encourage people to engage and connect? One of the things we really heard from managers was that they missed the hallway connection, running into people and seeing people. And that really stuck with me. I'm like, how do we create spaces where we intentionally encourage people to connect? So we've started to think about places like meditation nap kind of prayer rooms, that we have 1 or 2 of those that allow people to take that mental health break if they need it. We've also been talking about incorporating like really low maintenance, like recreational activities, like taking a space and putting a puzzle on a table, or like wall Scrabble or tic-tac-toe, or maybe a ping pong table, though I'm not sure that'll fly in this organization, or maybe just a small putting green. These are not the intention is not to become the next Google. This is a very conservative organization. But these kinds of spaces allow for mental health breaks, for brain breaks when we're working on something or we need to solve a problem. Oftentimes, the business gets done on the golf course. So why not have a putting green where you can work and talk and play just a little bit to sort of help the ideas and the creativity flowing? And they're great places to engage. And there's lots of research that backs all this up as well. There was a study done by Brigham University a bunch of years ago that looked at the connection between productivity and things like playing video games. And there's a whole body of knowledge around the value of these kinds of wellness spaces because they can relieve stress, they can lead to problem solving, better communication, inspiration, and just engagement. There's these stories about how Steve Jobs, if he ever got stuck on a problem, if he was working on something for more than 10 minutes and couldn't resolve it, he would get up and go for a walk for 10 minutes. Because that's what happens when we're stuck on something. If we change our activity, like going for a walk or doing a puzzle or anything like that, our brains keep working. But the activity allows us to refocus. So the brain is doing its thing, and when we come back, we can often solve that problem. I know I used to, when I exercise, sometimes I go, oh, wait, I just solved the problem I was thinking about, because our brain is always going. So these kinds of healthy, engaging spaces are something we're really looking to incorporate. And the people, the leadership, are looking for these kinds of spaces too. The fourth space that really seems to matter are technology. During the pandemic, all the good technology went home. Everybody took it all home, and what got left in the office was kind of bare. So one of the things we realized is that as people were coming back in, one of their big complaints was that the technology was old, that there were old monitors, they were smaller monitors, that a lot of people have bigger, better monitors at home, and so the technology, it's better for them to work at home than coming into the office. So we had a lot of conversations with IT around how do we refresh and upgrade the technology that's in the office. And as we think about what goes into the office going forward, how do we refresh all that technology as well? This organization happens to be a really big whiteboard organization. They will write on anything. But with people being virtual, they have been experimenting with a lot of like the virtual whiteboarding software, which is kind of meh if you've used it. And they have come across, and they've been using and now piloting the whiteboard technology, these sort of smart whiteboards. And if you haven't seen them, they are super cool. What they do is they allow the people in a room to use a whiteboard, and the people who are virtual, there's an extra camera so that the people virtual can actually see what is being written on the whiteboard in real time, so that they're able to really collaborate and stay engaged. In the previous, people were taking like pictures of what was on the whiteboard and then texting it to somebody who was virtual, which is not a way to stay connected. So this kind of technology really matters. The other thing that was super surprising is I mentioned they're a utility energy company, so they have EV stations that are free. It turns out, more than I would have expected, managers were admitting to the fact that they and their staff were coming into the office once a week because they could charge their electric cars for free. I was like, wow. So there's a new perk that they probably hadn't thought about. And it's got the organization thinking, maybe we need to add a couple more. If people see this as a value add and a reason to come to the office, great. Let it be a perk. Let's engage that and see how we can capitalize on that. If people are coming in and that's something we can do to incentivize them, then maybe we should go with it. So technology matters. Number 5. We all know food matters, right? Food matters every time we bring people together. But I want to talk a little bit about the issue I mentioned before around food services in particular. And for FMs who have been responsible for food services, I think this has been one of the biggest challenges for them. It's really hard to plan food and to serve food and to buy food if you have no idea how many people are showing up. And for you and all your organizations where people are coming in at different places and different times, and if you offer food services, it has really been a challenge. And in this organization, they have really diminished the food offerings. I had almost 50% of the managers complain to me about food services and food spaces. And again, I was there talking about the work environment, and they're talking to me about food spaces, and that they're upset that the cafeteria hours are fewer, and that there's no more salad bar, and there's no more hot food, and really feeling challenged because that means that they can't rely on the cafeteria for lunch anymore. They have to bring it in, or they have to run out and get it, which takes time and energy and different kinds of things. So it just shifts how people feel about being in the office. So it really got me thinking about, well, if people aren't going to the cafeteria, and it was a fabulous cafeteria, it was so robust in sort of heyday, it was like buzzing and people were really connected, and it was a really, everybody was there. And if people aren't there anymore, that means they're probably eating at their desks, which is kind of sad and not what we want to see. So we've been thinking more about how do we incorporate some small eating spaces outside of the building that has the cafeteria to encourage and allow people to come together to eat. So small farm tables or banquettes that can be really multi-purpose spaces that just allow people to come together to eat, and maybe even thinking about spaces outside as well. I'm working on trying to convince facilities and HR to put in a policy that doesn't allow people to actually eat at their desk. I've seen this work in some organizations, and when you have this policy, I mean, you can say it's about, we don't want bugs and critters, we don't want you eating at your desk, but really it's about bringing people together. Like, sit down and talk to someone, take a break from your work, because that break is an important moment also, right? We shouldn't be eating and working at the same time. Those breaks are important for our brains to reset, to rethink, and all the things I talked about, sort of the wellness of spaces. Okay, so if I've talked about food, then you know what's coming: coffee. So I am not a coffee drinker. Even though the earliest, that front side, you saw Alana's Roasters, I was pretty excited to see. That was a California coffee shop. To see my name as a coffee shop was pretty cool. I'm not a coffee drinker, but I am fascinated by coffee culture. So let me tell you about coffee in this organization. Currently, today, they have coffee pantries, several of them on the floors and all in the different buildings. And the way they have done coffee in the past is they have the coffee urns. So a big urn that, someone would brew coffee. So before the pandemic, Bob would come in at 6:30 in the morning. He would, brew the urn of coffee in his little pantry, by his area. And everybody knew that Bob brewed the coffee, and everybody knew it was a fresh brewed cup of coffee. But in this new world, Bob may not be coming in at all, or maybe he comes in one day. And what was happening, and again, what I was hearing a lot from leaders, was that there was no clarity around whether the coffee that was in the urn was actually fresh. One manager sent me this photo, which shows that somebody brewed some coffee and said, "Today I brewed this coffee," which is great, except he was like, "It's Wednesday, so I don't know if today is today Wednesday, or if today was yesterday Tuesday, or gosh, maybe even Friday for all I know." So I know, the only thing I do know for sure is I'm not drinking that coffee because I have no idea if it's fresh. So when I shared this sort of revelation to facilities, their initial response was signage. Let's create coffee station etiquette. And so they identified how to brew the coffee, and that if you're going to brew coffee, you should put not just today on it, but the actual date, so people know that it's fresh. And this is their current solution. And I asked them, like, what about like the single serves? And they're like, it's really an expensive option. So, and not a lot of people were in the office, so they weren't sure, and it's kind of holding in that way. But I knew that this etiquette signage wasn't enough, because the other thing that I heard from the managers and leaders that I was talking to is that coffee is so important to some of them that they might bring their coffee in from home, but a lot of them actually brought in their own single serve coffee makers. And I wish I could see right now, all of you, and you'll tell me in the chat or later on if you're seeing this as well. But there is a lot of people who were saying that they've brought their own little coffee maker into the office, sitting on their workstations, sitting in their cubicles. And I was like, wait, really? That's crazy. And I was on campus and I walked around and I found dozens of them in all different kinds of places where people have their own coffee makers. So this really got me thinking and wondering about, like, what is it about coffee? Why does coffee matter so much? So here's my theory, that coffee is an amenity. It's an expected perk that most organizations have provided to their employees. People have come to expect getting a cup of coffee. And this company, McKinsey & Company, which in full disclosure is actually a coffee company, they had some data that talked about that employees feel more cared for and appreciated by when their employees provide a cup of coffee, and maybe even increases their productivity. So that got me thinking about, it's not just a cup of coffee. It's just not about the drink. That coffee is truly about connection. Coffee brings people together. Coffee is a way to take a break. I'm stuck on something. I need a break. I'm going to go get a cup of coffee. And on my way to get that coffee, I'm going to see a colleague, or I'm going to run into someone who's also getting a cup of coffee. So coffee is a social space. It's a wellness space. It's an engaging, impromptu engaging space to be in. So just like I was talking about before about engaging spaces, coffee is that. And that this new habit of people bringing in their own sort of singular coffee is actually counter to a collaborative culture. Because if people are just sitting at their desk and just getting their coffee and keep going, and now they're eating at their desk, they're drinking their coffee at their desk, then they might as well just stay at home, because the point of being in the office is to engage. So I think that facilities needs to tell people they got to take those Keurigs and single pods home, and that they have to really think about their coffee solution. If anyone has, we don't have this resolved yet. If anyone has any suggestions, I'd be happy to continue to hear them. How do we figure out how to create inexpensive opportunities for people to get coffee for free, that allows them to be engaged and takes away that singular solo moment? So coffee really does matter, because it's the place and space that you go to get that coffee. Which brings us to culture, our last one, that culture really matters. So with my academic hat on, let's just talk for a second about what really is culture. So the definition of culture is that culture is a set of values. It's the ideals or the principles of the founder of an organization, and that those values and principles, they persist over a period of time, and they create the behaviors, the traditions, the customs, the legacy of an organization. Culture allows us to sort of feel engaged and sort of that sense of belonging with our organization, because culture is what organizations care about. It's what they value as a company, and it's how I as an individual feel connected to the whole of the organization. Peter Drucker, the management guru, he is often credited with saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I love this quote. And I'm a strategic planner, and even I know that while I believe that what I do is really important, the strategic plan is nothing compared to the culture, because the culture is the vibe of the organization. It is about understanding that the culture is what brings people together. It what brings everybody in line, working together to be successful for the organization. What was super interesting back last fall was when Amazon CEO said, hey, 3 days in the office is no longer good enough. We're going to be back in the office 5 days. And everyone was like, wait, what? Amazon, the tech company, is going to be 5 days back in the office? But one of the main drivers for making this decision was he felt that they still needed to foster a culture of collaboration. And that wasn't even happening over 3 days. Super interesting to me to think about how culture really impacts and matters. So I got another quick pulse question for you. This is a quick yes or no. And the question is FM responsible for culture in your organization? Do you think that that's the case? Because you might be thinking, well, wait a second. I can know that I'm responsible for those occupant services, right? I'm responsible for the cafeteria and the coffee pantries and the engaging spaces and the individual and together spaces. Those are FM responsibilities. But culture? Are we really responsible for culture too? And I bet you know that I'm about to say yes. And I'm kind of curious if you're all about to say yes. So, Kylie, you can let me know when that poll has come through. Do
Yes,
people think that they're responsible for
we have a
culture?
few more votes coming in right
Tick,
now.
tick, 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 tick.
Mostly everybody's voted. I'll give y'all a few more moments, but right now we're leaning towards yes. I'll give y'all one more moment and let's end it. And so 73% said yes, 27% said no.
Okay, I'm going to now work on the 27%. See if I can convince any of you why I believe that FM is responsible in some part for culture. So here's the thing. We know, and what I'd like to suggest to you is that the occupant services that matter, they are the physical manifestation of our organization's culture. Every organization has a mission and vision and a value statement. And the value statements might say something like, we value collaboration and teamwork and communication and wellness and fun and doing the right thing. And you might go, oh, yeah, we do have value statements that say that. Those values are your organization's culture. So I do think that all of these types of occupant services, the individual spaces, together spaces, engaged spaces, technology, the food, the culture, and 10 other things, they are all part of the spaces and places that reinforce and strengthen our culture. So I do think we do and can impact culture in a very significant way. As a matter of fact, I think it's our job as FMs to ensure that the physical spaces are aligned. If our organizations are walking and quacking and talking a little bit differently than they did 2 years ago, it's our job as FMs to ensure that the physical space also shifts to realign to meet the needs of the organization. So because people are working differently, it's time to think about how does the physical space support that? And because what we value are things like collaboration and engagement and unity, we have to ensure that the spaces help to support those kinds of important values that create the culture of our organization. So when I asked the organizational leaders about culture during those meetings, I got a lot of interesting answers about what their perception of the current culture was. So there was a group that said, culture is not that different. It's good, it's balanced, there's good inter-team connection, it's quiet, it's conservative, everybody's happy. But there was also some leaders who said it's different, it's in flux. And the language they used was really kind of unusual. They were saying like it's weird here and it's no longer authentic and I don't know anybody and it feels a little stressful and people aren't really here the way they used to be and I miss how it was before. And the challenge was that the leadership was sort of evenly split between these two perceptions. And that is a problem for the organization, one that they have to figure out how to solve because they're not going to go back to the old culture because things have changed too much. But there are a lot of leadership who are unhappy. And if there's leadership unhappy, there's probably people who are unhappy. And maybe it's one of the reasons why they don't come into the office. But there are also some silver linings for the organization. They hired a new EVP, and in his bio, he actually talked about ensuring the right culture for success. And I'm like, oh, wait, this is great. And I've been able to engage with him and talk to him, and because he's really a champion of this idea of how do we support culture. Because I think that because we know we are responsible for the physical spaces that support engagement of people coming together, that I think we are responsible for helping to shape this new culture. We can't create it by ourselves, but we do create the physical environment where all that magic happens. And that's where we need to be focused on and moving forward. Okay, So those are the 7 things that matter. I thought you might be interested to hear about the next chapter, kind of where this story is headed. So what we did and what I did was work through all of the buildings, and our goal was to create a balanced, equitable, and engaged work environment that really was focused on realigning and refreshing the workspace. So we identified furniture options because there was no appetite for construction. Furniture options where we could create engaging spaces, different kinds of individual spaces, different kinds of coffee spaces, different kinds of together spaces and impromptu spaces, so that we can create and identify small areas where we can incorporate these new kinds of spaces to freshen up the work environment that is no longer working because of the dynamic fluidness of how the people are working. And we're actually starting at the end of this month, so I'm about to get really busy for a period of time. The other thing that we have done, which I mentioned before, I alluded to before, is that dealing with this issue of capacity. And what we've decided is that um, uh, people who are not working on average of campus 2 days a week, if you're not working 2 days a week, you're going to lose your dedicated workspace. And so we know that's probably going to create some behavior changes and some frustration, but it is the only way we figured out how to capture some of the spaces that are really going unoccupied most of the time, and in exchange we'll have these new spaces for people to work in. So the last idea I want to share with you is this. So this is a kindergarten classroom. Maybe it looks familiar to you. Maybe you got kids in kindergarten or you remember it. When I look at a space like this, what I see group spaces where the kids would come together on the carpet. I see team spaces where groups will meet at a table. I see one-on-one spaces for the teacher and the student. I see creative spaces. I see quiet spaces when you need to take a little moment to sort of step back. Adults and grown-ups call this kind of environment in the workplace activity-based work, where there is a variety of different places and spaces to work that match the different tasks that are being done and who you're doing them with. So what we really need to be doing and thinking about in our workspaces is thinking about variety, adaptability, and flexibility. So perhaps everything we needed to learn in kindergarten, about being good and how we should act, is also about the physical space. Because these are the kinds of spaces that we're really working towards creating an environment that allows people choose how they need to work at the moment that they need to work it, and being able to move around those spaces without rigidity built in. So look, in FM, as we kind of wrap up here, in FM, our job is to create spaces and places where people can be productive, safe, and healthy. And I really do believe that because we're responsible for creating places and spaces, we're really responsible for creating spaces where people can be people. And that means finding ways for them to work independently, for them to work together, for them to collaborate, and to build the strength of culture. And that is my coffee and culture and all things that are important in the workplace. So thank you for listening and playing along with the polls. I think we have some time to take some questions, or love to hear any of your own experiences along the way.
Yes. So, okay. Alana, we have somebody from the audience with their hand raised. Carla, I'm going to try and send you an unmute request so that you can go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Thank you so much. And Alana, I love the presentation. Thank you so much. Full disclosure,
Thank
I've known Alana
you.
for a very long time, but here's my question. I think you got to it at the end. You talked about leadership and how they view culture. And so here is what I'm seeing. So I'm working with a variety of clients, and all of them are trying to implement a flexible workspace. And all of them are struggling because no one under the age of 30 thinks they should be in the office. They see no point in it. And when they get there, it's not doing what they want them to do. And I feel like we've got these great spaces. We've got coffee spaces. We're getting free food. We're doing all of these things. but yet there is a generational, maybe, difference, or a difference in how people view the workspace now. And I also think that potentially leaders haven't asked their employees what culture they want and really how to use those wonderful spaces, because people come in and they might have a great team space, but they're sitting in their office still doing a team meeting. So what's your suggestion?
Well, all right.
It's a lot.
So it's nice to have when one of your oldest BFFs asks you a really challenging question. Carla and I went to school together, so we know each other a really long time. So look, there's no one size fits all moment in any of this. Leadership does matter, and leadership has to show up in order for staff to show up, and they have to have reasons for engagement. It is a top down moment to encourage people to come in. I also personally believe that there is value in requiring people to come in a certain number of days, whatever those days are, if those are certain days of the week. And I know that that's really unpopular to think about, but from a support services standpoint, I can feed people if I know everybody's coming in on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. I know I can support them. And if everybody's coming in for having that sort of shorter version in-person work week, there's a lot of value to that. Now, this organization is not doing that, and we're trying to sort of work around that. But I think that the leadership are the ones who are finding the incentives and are looking for the tools to have their people come in. And they're saying, I need you to come in on Wednesdays. And that is what's happening. And as I start this next round of planning work, as we go into implementation, I'm going to be so interested to hear and see, because I felt like a lot of leaders were like leaning towards, we're going to pick a day to be in the office. We're going to all be in on Tuesdays. We're going to all be on Wednesdays. And that is a leadership moment. And without
Right.
that, you're going to have people, still doing what they want to. Leaders have to be leaders. That's their job.
100% agree.
Thank you, Carla, and thank you, Alana, for that. Alana, how do you get the buy-in on making these changes? How do you get everybody to actually be in on that and be okay with
it? Change management planning and good communications, and a lot of soft skills of conversation. I spent months having conversations with the executive team and getting their buy-in, and I think that has been the key to starting to make these changes and to make people go, oh yeah, we're going to have this again, a sort of top down. And change is just like some people didn't even want to leave the office and couldn't believe that they could work at home. We're actually pretty adaptable as humans. And so even though they may not like it initially, they start to get used to it. And our hope is that when they do come in, they see the different kinds of spaces and it feels good to be there, and they see other people, that will create a new sense of habits. We're not telling people they can't, they should still work at home, but we want them to, when they're in the workspace, to feel really productive. If it feels like drudgery to come into the office, you're going to have, less likelihood. But you also have to give it time. Just like it took time to adjust to working at home, it's going to take time to create a new world order is, and every organization is different. So I acknowledge that what we're doing here may not work for another organization, but maybe some gem of an idea will spur on something that works. Because Carla made this comment about how demographically the young people don't want to come in. Well, I know an organization where the young people, the only ones are coming in, and they want the older people to come in because they want to learn from the older people, right? So every organization is a little bit different, and you need to understand that heartbeat and figure out what works best. But it means talking to people and not working in a vacuum.
Totally. I had somebody
Alana,
else with their hand raised, Jackie, so I'm going to send you an unmute request. Let us know if you've received that.
So my company is on a work from anywhere. So people come and go as they please into the brick and mortar that we have. And one of the struggles I'm finding is people working in a vacuum. Back to that, they're arranging, let's say, large scale meetings with their teams at our central headquarters office, but everybody forgets to let Jackie know that we're having a meeting there until until it's a crisis because they have no chairs or tables, and how do we order lunch, and who do we, where's the water and where's the coffee? And because a lot of people are coming from, they haven't been to the office all the time. So I know for me, that's one of the biggest struggles and frustrations of myself and my team is we're here to help, right? Like I have no problem making sure that you're set up for a meeting and jumping in wherever my team and I need to, but I don't know what I don't know. And a lot of times I find out secondhand through the grapevine and I'm like, oh, so finance is having a big meeting next week. Like, fantastic. And then I'll ask the person, like, so I hear you have, oh, yeah, can you help us?
So I wonder in your reservation system, I was just having this conversation. In your reservation system, do you have the ability to either let it email you or for some kind of like, hey, please also contact so that when they're going through reserving the space, they see that there's another step to do or something like that, or some other back
Great.
back back of the house protocol that would give you a sooner heads up. Some reservation systems allow for that kind of stuff.
I'll check with my IT partners on that and see. That would be great because then people don't also have to remember to contact me separately,
Right,
right? And
because
then
it'll be
they
like
go from
magic. You're
there.
like, oh, wait. And then you can reach out and be
Feeling,
proactive.
especially I don't go into the office every day myself either. So, to find out somebody's having this big meeting, I tend, especially if it's like an executive level meeting, things like that, I tend to like to be in the office that day just to put out any fires that, may arise. But it's things as simple as like, oh, this person doesn't have building access. And then it's like a crisis at 6 o'clock in the morning. My phone's blowing up to give somebody building access. So
Oh,
I'm gonna look.
yeah, the
I'm
worst.
gonna look into that. I think that if there's got to be some way we can do that the facilities is looped in.
Awesome.
Any more questions, Kylie?
Let's see. Ooh, we do have one more. Wayne asked, could a company's well-defined why determine clearly what their policy should be? Could this debate partially be due to the fact that many organizations do not have a strong why?
Oh, you're speaking my language, Wayne. You know that, right? So, absolutely. So, this process was really trying to help us understand their why. And I think we didn't realize it when we started, but I think the trends that I then reported back to sort of helped to open that conversation about really what we want to create. And a little side note that when I began this process, one of the things I asked the leaders was what would change everything? Like, today everybody's working anywhere they want, but what would change anything? And some people said, well, if leadership changed. And now I have been working with this company for over 20 years, and I know that every 4 to 5 years they get a new CEO. The CEO who is currently there, he came in right before the pandemic, and he's not even from the Philadelphia area. So for him, he just never even showed up, and of course, he had no interest in making anybody else show up either. Well, as time would have it, he just announced his retirement. So, it'll be really interesting to see what happens I think he's here through the end of the year. And as we're doing all this and creating a new place in space, because the why might change again. So I will keep you posted. But yeah, going through a strategic planning process, which is part of what essentially what we did, helped us really is helping me understand what does this organization really need. And right now, their why had been, we believe we can be productive where anybody is. And that was their why. And that's what's been driving everything that they have stood for. So it'll be interesting to see if there's any tweaks to that in the coming years. Because remember I said the workplace is always evolving? Well, there you go.
That's the first thing you told us. Well, that's
Great,
all the
great.
questions I have. Before turning it over to Dexter, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Alana. I enjoyed working with you and I enjoyed listening to this presentation. Definitely gives us so many wonderful things to think about. So thank you. And now, Dexter, go ahead and close us out.
Kylie, thank you, and Alana, definitely big, big, big thanks to you. This was wonderful. I mean, this is a conversation that's ongoing, right, and so relevant to what a lot of FMs are dealing with at this time. So thank you so much. For everyone, Alana's information is here in front of you if you want to ask her. I'm sure. Well, let's ask. Is that okay, Alana? If everyone
Absolutely.
contacts
Bring
you,
them on. Connect with me
because
on
I'm
LinkedIn.
opening the
Email
floodgates
me.
here. I think that this conversation gets better as we all add input, right? And what's going on in
Sure.
our own neck of the woods, right? And so, I'm looking forward to learning from others. I'm dealing with much of the same. Right? I come to an empty building every single day, right, and try to figure out what can I do what's the draw, how do we get people back into the building? So thanks again. Like I said, so relevant and so on time, right? Everyone, thank you for joining us today. Have a wonderful day. I look forward to seeing you next month at our first Wednesday of the month webinar series. So take care and have a great day. Bye bye, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.